Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Mora, and I am a survey analyst at the Public Policy Institute of California. Welcome to our virtual program today featuring findings from our latest PPIC statewide survey on Californians and their economic well-being. Their survey was supported from funding from the RJR and Francis F. Miller Foundation and the James Irvine Foundation. And today's event is supported with funding from the PPIC Corporate Circle and the PPIC Donor Circle. We'd like to thank them for their support. For today's program, my colleague Dean Bonner will walk through some of the findings from the survey, and then we will discuss a few key takeaways before answering questions from the audience. If you have a question, please send it along with your name and organization to the email address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. As a reminder, PPIC is a public charity and does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. I'd now like to welcome my colleague, Associate Survey Director and Research Fellow, Dean Bonner.
Thank you very much, Lauren, for that very kind introduction. And while I'm getting my screen shared, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us. I would also like to acknowledge my other authors on this report, including Survey Director Mark Baldessari and Survey Analyst Deja Thomas. I would also like to acknowledge the funders of this survey, the James Irvine Foundation and the RJR and Francis F. Miller Foundation. Prior to discussing this survey in particular, I would like to take a moment to just give everyone a little bit of a background on the PPIC statewide survey. The mission of the survey is to provide timely, relevant, and nonpartisan data on political, social, and economic opinions, which we hope will provide a voice for all Californians and help and improve and inform state policymaking and raise awareness. The PPIC survey covers perceptions, attitudes, and policy preferences, and since 1998, we've interviewed more than 420,000 Californians on more than 200 general issues, specific, and regional surveys. This particular survey is the 5th annual survey on the economic well-being of Californians, and this survey is very unique to the PPIC statewide survey in that it has an oversample of Californians with incomes under $40,000 per year. And this really allows us to examine the perceptions and experiences of this group at a much more granular level than it would be otherwise possible. This particular survey was fielded right after the election using the Ipsos Knowledge Panel. We interviewed just over 2,300 adults for this survey, about 1,400 likely voters, and just north of 1,000 lower-income Californians. And the margin of error for that for these groups ranges from 3.1 for all adults to 5.3 for lower-income Californians. And now let's start by looking at some broad economic kind of outlook. And today we find that nearly 6 in 10 Californians expect bad economic times in the next 12 months. And findings today actually offer the most positive assessment we have seen since November 2021. And so while, nearly 6 in 10 still say bad economic time, they expect bad economic times, it is an improvement over recent months and years. And the majority of Californians across parties, regions, and demographic groups think that bad times are ahead, except among Democrats, where a slim majority expect good economic times. And turning to views of their personal financial situation, we find that most Californians are satisfied with their financial situation. However, fewer than 1 in 5 are very satisfied. It's a broad-based opinion with 2 in 3 or more across parties, regions, and demographic groups saying they're satisfied today with their household financial situation. And while there is broad-based satisfaction, there are differences when looking at the share who are very satisfied. Notably, those with incomes of $40,000 or less are far less likely than those making $80,000 or more to say they are very satisfied. Additionally, renters are much less likely than homeowners to be very satisfied. And when we look at the oversample of lower income Californians, we see notable differences emerge. Californians with incomes of 20,000 or under are 10 points less satisfied than those making 20,000 to 40,000. And that's a 49 to 59% difference when it comes to satisfaction. Additionally, we find that 6 in 10 lower income men compared to just half of lower income women express satisfaction. So there's also a gender difference among lower income groups. And turning from personal finances to a broad concept called the American dream, we find that just 1 in 3 Californians think the American dream, that is, if you work hard, you'll get ahead, still holds true, while 2 in 3 say that it either once held true and doesn't anymore, or that it just never held true. There are noticeable differences across racial ethnic groups, with Asian Americans the most likely to say that the American dream holds true, while African Americans stand out for their belief that it never held true. Belief that the American dream still holds true increases with rising age, education, and income groups, income, and is higher among men and homeowners compared to women and renters. And when we only look at lower income Californians with incomes less than 40,000, we see that men are more than twice as likely as women to say the American dream still holds true, while the differences that we saw among all adults are much more muted when we look at age and education groups. And prior to moving on, I think it is notable that majorities of Californians across parties, regions, and demographic groups think that achieving the American dream is harder in California than it is elsewhere in the state. And so that's an important finding to put kind of the California dream in context. And while Californians are somewhat satisfied with their own finances, they're much more pessimistic when looking to the future. Today, we actually find that 7 in 10 say that today's children will be worse off financially than their parents. And this share has risen 7 points since our initial well-being survey in 2020, and is much higher than it was 6 years ago when just 50% said that children would be worse off. This pessimistic feeling is widespread, with majorities across parties, regions, and demographic groups saying that today's children will be worse off than their parents. Notably, those with kids 18 or younger in their house are much more pessimistic than those without children in the home. As we have in previous years, we've actually asked a series of questions about California's experiences with various financial difficulties in the last year. And given the impact that inflation has had, it's not surprising that Californians, and especially lower income Californians, were most likely to say that they or someone in their family reduced meals or cut back on food to save money. And beyond the evident income divide, the share saying they cut back on food is highest among Latinos, African Americans, women, Californians age 18 to 34, and those in the Inland Empire compared to elsewhere. We find that 1 in 5 or more Californians say that they had their hours or pay cut, had difficulty paying rent or mortgage, and were unable to pay a monthly bill or put off going to a doctor or purchasing medicine. Across all of these difficulties, findings have been similar in recent years, and lower incomes, especially those with incomes of 20,000 or less, are most likely to say they've experienced these difficulties. And beyond asking about experiencing financial difficulties, we also ask Californians how much they worry about a number of financial aspects of their life. Californians are most likely to say that they worry every day or almost every day about saving for retirement, the cost of housing, and the amount of debt that they have. Fewer say they worry about paying bills, the cost of healthcare, or job loss. Among parents, we ask questions about their worries, and we find that 1 in 3 say they worry every day or almost every day about saving for their children's college education, while 1 in 10 worry about the cost of childcare. Generally speaking, Latinos and African Americans are more likely to worry than Asian Americans and whites, and worry declines with rising income. It's very notable that the share of folks who say that they worry about these items have been similar over the last 5 years, meaning that many Californians have expressed these worries year over year now. And additionally, in conducting some research after last year's survey, I found that, lower income Californians are especially likely to say that they worry about multiple issues, with more than 1 in 3 saying they worry every day or nearly every day about 3 or more of these items. And so we really see these things stacking up year over year, as well as with each person worrying about more than just 1 or 2 of these. We'd like to now turn to some questions that we've asked of employed adults about their jobs. And when asked how satisfied they are with their job, 9 in 10 employed Californians say they are satisfied. However, only 1 in 3 are very satisfied, just over 1 in 3. Satisfaction today is similar to earlier well-being surveys, and we find that overall satisfaction is quite similar across parties and regions, although those in the Inland Empire are much more likely than others to be very satisfied. Notably, lower-income Californians are less satisfied with their jobs than those making higher incomes. And when we only look at lower-income Californians, we see that women are much more likely than men, older Californians more likely than younger, and whites more likely than other racial ethnic groups to say that they're very satisfied. We also asked employed Californians what type of benefits and opportunities that their job provides. Most say that their job offers a fair amount of job security, while smaller majorities say their job offers opportunity for advancement or education or training assistance. And both of these last two are especially important if we're looking at kind of economic mobility. When we look at those with incomes under 40,000 or less and with less income or less education, we actually see that they're less likely to say that their job offers these qualities. And in some other questions that we asked about jobs, we see that when it comes to stable and predictable pay or stable and predictable hours, 8 in 10 Californians say that their job offers these qualities. Additionally, strong majorities of employed Californians say that they can voice concerns without fear or negative consequences, as well as the fact that decisions made at work take their views and concerns into account. Notably, 2 in 3 workers say that their work provides trainings or meetings on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So another topic related to work is the impact that artificial intelligence or AI may have on the workplace in years to come. AI or new technologies has the potential to impact jobs all across the income scale, whether it be fast food writers or screenwriters, fast food workers or screenwriters, sorry. And while most employed adults have heard or read at least a little about AI and have an unfavorable view of it, just 1 in 3 working adults are concerned about the possibility of AI resulting in them losing their job or having hours cut. 2 in 3 workers are not concerned, with 1 in 4 not concerned at all. And we actually find that fewer than 4 in 10 workers across parties, regions, and demographic groups say they are concerned, but differences do emerge with those in the Inland Empire, workers of color, and those with incomes of less than 20,000, most likely to say that they're very concerned. And transitioning from AI to labor unions, we find that while 7 in 10 Californians approve of labor unions today, just 1 in 3 Californians say that unions should have more influence than they have today. A plurality of 42% say they should have the same amount of influence, and 1 in 4 say that they should have less influence than they do today. Democrats, residents of San Francisco Bay Area, African Americans, and lower income Californians are especially likely to say that labor unions should have more influence than they have today. And we find that 3 in 10 or fewer across regions and demographic groups want labor unions to have less influence. However, there is a wide partisan divide, with more than 4 in 10 Republicans compared to 1 in 10 Democrats saying that they want labor unions to have less influence than they do today. And as we have in past economic well-being surveys, we asked Californians a series of questions about policies that could improve the economic well-being of Californians. In total, we asked about 8 policies, and 8 of these 9 policies received majority support, with even a couple of them receiving bipartisan support. We find that Californians are most supportive of increasing funding for job training programs. And on this question, majorities across parties were in favor, as well as overwhelming shares across regions and demographic groups. On offering a public health care option similar to Medicare, we find that 8 in 10 Californians are in favor, including about half of Republicans and overwhelming shares of Democrats, independents, and Californians across regional and demographic groups. We actually find one of the widest political divides when we ask about a government policy to eliminate college debt. In this case, we find that while nearly 6 in 10 overall favor eliminating college debt, that includes 78% of Democrats and just 1 in 5 Republicans hold this view. And as I mentioned, there were 8 of the 9 issues that we asked about, or policies that we asked about, actually had majority opinion. The one issue that failed to garner majority support is on a proposed universal basic income of about $1,000 a month for all citizens, whether or not they work. As we have in recent years, just shy of half of Californians say they favor this. And there's a wide partisan divide on this, with more than 6 in 10 Democrats in favor, compared to fewer than 1 in 5 Republicans who are in favor. And we also asked about one issue that was on the ballot in 2024, and that's raising minimum wage. And while that measure narrowly failed at the ballot box, we actually found in our survey that 58% of likely voters said they favored this in our post-election survey. And so it was somewhat surprising that that lost, but it seems like there's general overall support for the issue. And lastly, looking towards the future, we asked a couple questions about the economic priorities of the next president. We found that just over half of Californians say that getting costs under control should be a very high priority, while 45% said that building an economy that gives every American a chance to succeed should be a very high priority. Finding across on income groups on both of these questions are roughly similar, with those with incomes under $20,000 the least likely to say each is a very high priority. Notably, there's a wide partisan divide on prioritizing a more equitable economy. While there is no partisan divide on prioritizing a more equitable economy, 7 in 10 Republicans, compared to just under half of Democrats, say that getting inflation under control should be a very high priority. And I would really encourage you to, look at the survey and the crosstabs that we have online, and the time trends that we have online, because while we weren't able to cover all of these topics that are on the screen now in the survey. These are, there's a ton of information available on our website, in the report, as I mentioned in the crosstabs, about all of these things, including things like, race relations and their impact on economic equality, work from home, as well as the share of Californians who say they're considering moving out of state or elsewhere in Californians because of the lack of well-paying jobs. And before I bring my colleague Lauren Mora back to discuss key takeaways for this survey, I want to remind everyone that we'll begin taking audience questions in just a few minutes. And if you have one, please email us to the email address on your screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com, and be sure to include your name or organization. And I'd like to now welcome Lauren back while I stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Dean, for your very informative slides and presentation. And like Dean mentioned, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The survey and the crosstabs have so much more, so we really encourage everyone to check those out. So to start out our key takeaways, I wanted to talk a few minutes about sort of mental well-being of Californians. So we did ask respondents, taken all together, would you say you're very happy, pretty happy, or not too happy? And what we found that about 1 in 10 say they are very happy, about half say they are pretty happy, and 36% say they are not too happy. And these views are actually pretty similar across gender groups, race, ethnicity, those with children with or without children in the household, and are somewhat similar across partisan groups and age. However, we do see large differences when it comes to income groups. And so that's what got me really interested in this question, given it's the economic well-being survey. About a third of residents making 80,000 or more say they're not too happy, compared to half of those who make 40K or less. And looking at the oversample that we have of residents making 40K or less, unhappiness is particularly high among political independents, residents in the Central Valley, and 18 to 34-year-olds. So like I mentioned, this made me wonder some of the links between economic conditions, inequalities, and work conditions, and how that could lead to unhappiness. And so I was able to create complete some really insightful insights that I would love to share with you all. So to start off, some insight on personal economic situations. 45% who say they are not too happy are also not satisfied with their household's financial situation. This is compared to only 15% who say they are pretty happy and 8% who say they are very happy. So very much higher. And then close to half who say they are not too happy say they are financially worse off than a year ago. And this is compared to 2 or 10 or less who say they are pretty happy or very happy. So again, much, much higher. Furthermore, about 3 in 10 who report unhappiness would also say it'd be very difficult or nearly impossible for them to cover an emergency expense of $1,000. This is compared to about 1 in 10 who say they are very happy or pretty happy. So we can see that there's definitely a correlation between people who report being not too happy and kind of more unsatisfaction with their personal financial situations. So looking at more specific worries, among Californians who say they are not too happy overall, 22 worry every day or almost every day about them or someone in their family losing their job. About 4 in 10 worry about the cost of housing and being able to save enough for their retirement at least almost every day. And a third worry about the amount of debt they have and about paying their bills. And again, these shares are much higher than among Californians who report higher levels of happiness. And relatedly, those who say they are not too happy also tend to have more pessimistic views of the state overall. About 7 in 10 say the state is going in the wrong direction, and about 3 in 4 expect the state to have financially bad times in the next year. So I thought this was really interesting. There's definitely a link between unhappiness and personal economic conditions that, given this is the economic well-being survey, really interesting to highlight. Dean, would you like to add anything?
No, those crosstabs are really interesting. I hadn't had a chance to look at that very closely, but what you've spelled out really kind of attaches kind of the personal finances with happiness in a way that I think kind of most people might assume, but it's always good to have kind of data to back that up.
Definitely. And I would like to turn to another key key takeaway discussion, and this on one of California's largest issues, and this is housing. So the cost and availability of housing is undoubtedly a huge problem facing the state. In fact, when we asked Californians in our California Their Government survey about the largest issue facing the state, housing is usually number 2 after economic conditions. So it's on people's minds. And in this survey, we had the opportunity to ask about several economic difficulties that Californians are facing when it comes to housing. Dean was able to touch up on some of that in his presentation, but I did want to take the opportunity to go a bit more in depth and highlight some key differences, in particular groups that may be having a harder time in this area than others. So to start off, we did ask respondents if they have had difficulty paying their rent or mortgage in the last year. And like Dean said, about a fifth of Californians say that has happened to them or someone in their household. And this is up slightly from 17% when slightly up from last November when 17% of Californians said the same thing. And across regions, 3 in 10 residents in the Central Valley and Inland Empire reported this difficulty, followed by 23% in Los Angeles and 17% in the San Francisco Bay Area and 15% in Orange, San Diego. And about a third of renters say they've had trouble paying their rent, and this is about 3 times as likely as homeowners who say the same. Overall, 12% of homeowners say they've had difficulty paying their mortgage in the last year. And unsurprisingly, there is a large difference of across income groups. Only 11% of residents making 80K or more have had trouble, while about a third of residents making between 40 and 80K, and 4 in 10 making less have experienced this. And looking at the oversample of lower income Californians, it's particularly in the Inland Empire at 44%. And about half of lower income Latinos have reported facing this difficulty. And then as sort of related, we did ask Californians if they have faced the threat of eviction in the last year. And 4% say that this has happened to them, but this includes 7% in the Central Valley and the Inland Empire, and 4% are less elsewhere. And I just want to note that about 1 in 10 African Americans say they have faced this threat, and 1 in 10 renters have also. And there is variance by income. While not many higher income residents have faced this threat, about 1 in 10 residents earning between 20 and 40K have, and 1 in 5 residents making less than 20K have experienced the threat of eviction. And then just looking at the oversample of lower income Californians, 25% of 18 to 34-year-olds have faced this threat, about a quarter of lower incomes in the Central Valley, and 17% of lower income renters have faced the threat of eviction. So across some of these groups, that is a particularly significant number. And last question we asked was the worry about every day or almost every day about the cost of housing. And we found that 26% of Californians worry about the cost of housing for them and their family at least almost every day. And this chart has been similar every year since we first asked this question in December of 2020. And I just want to say that the residents kind of reporting this higher level of worry is residents in the Empire at 35%, African Americans at 35%, Latinos at 31%, and 38% of renters worry about the cost of housing at least almost every day. And lastly, I was able to do some additional crosstabs with these housing questions when it comes to worrying about the cost of housing. And I found that among residents who worry about the costing every day or almost every day, 52% report having faced difficulty paying their rent or mortgage in the last year. 26% say they have faced the threat of eviction in the past year. So definitely a big correlation between all of these factors. And overall, these numbers may not represent the majority of Californians, but it is a significant number, I feel. Looking at least a quarter of Californian adults who are kind of having this on their mind. And yeah, I just really wanted to share this with everybody, given it is the economic well-being and housing costs are on so many Californians' minds. And Jean, if you have anything else to share.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I would just add that, there has to be a link between kind of those views on housing and the views on the American dream, right? Because for a lot of people, it's not just if you work hard, you'll get ahead. It's that, the American dream is often construed as being able to buy a house, right? And for many
Sure.
people, that's just not, not plausible or or relatable to them. And so that's probably feeding into the views on the American dream, which we know is,
Mm.
most people say is harder to retrieve in California. And so just really fascinating and especially the numbers who face eviction, I think it was 1 in 3 younger, lower income folks. I mean, that's really just stark. And so I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. I guess it's time to turn to audience question and answers. At this time, if you do have a question, you can go ahead and submit it to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And it looks like we already have one. And this is from Russell from the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. He wants to know, did your survey look at differences between metro residents and those who live in small towns or rural areas? And if so, what did you find?
Yeah, no, it's the rural versus urban kind of is something that we've been looking into, and on an individual survey basis, I think it's a depending on how you define rural, it's kind of hard to kind of pinpoint that, but it is something that we're going to try to do some analysis on kind of moving forward, because it is obviously, not everyone lives in metropolitan areas. And so I think it's a hugely important subgroup that we should be looking at. Yeah.
We do have a second question. Pessimism about near-term outlook for California's economy appears to have declined slightly. Do you have a sense of what might be driving this?
Yeah, I was curious, not necessarily because I noticed the change, which it was a small change. I think it was like 6 points lower than in October.
Mhm.
And there's this link that we've seen over the years between kind of party control in Washington and kind of how people view the economy. And so I think, when you look at some of the subgroups, that kind of holds true where while it was 6 points overall, we actually saw a 24-point decline among Republicans, as well as double-digit declines in areas that might be kind of thought of as more conservative leaning. It was 10 points, I believe, in the Central Valley and the Inland Empire, and it was basically no change in the Bay Area. And it was double digits. I forget what the exact number was, also in Orange, San Diego. And so it seems to be being driven somewhat by kind of political views, which is not kind of out of the ordinary that people think this president is going to come in and really make things better regarding the economy. So I don't know if you saw anything else.
I did sort of notice comparing questions that we asked in this survey versus June of this year, so 6 months ago. So I believe that share was actually 68% who were expecting bad times. So about 10%, I believe, higher than today. And we also asked about people's personal finances in June as well. And we saw that there was actually a difference between a 7 point difference among those who say they are better off, or sorry, excuse me, worse off. It's actually 7 points less than in June. Um, so I also think maybe just people might be feeling a little bit better about their own personal situation. I don't have an answer as to why that is, but I did notice that correlation between 6 months ago versus today.
Yeah,
Um,
good point.
but yeah. If we can move on to the next question. Are there any particular groups or parts of the state that are especially concerned about the employment impacts of AI? I can start with this one.
Yeah.
Just want to reiterate that a slim majority of Californians do have an unfavorable view of artificial intelligence. In groups with particular high levels of unfavorability include women, residents without a college degree, and those earning 20,000 or less. So looking into the question about the possibility of AI resulting in job losses or having their hours cut, um, regionally, 36% of residents in Los Angeles and 39% of those in the Inland Empire say they have this concern. So those two regions is where this concern is the highest. Less than 3 in 10 in the Central Valley and Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area express this concern. So there is some regional differences we see. And then among demographic groups, African Americans, Asian Americans, and Latinos are all more concerned than white Californians. Unemployed adults under 55 are more likely than those 55 and over to be concerned about this. And about 4 in 10 working adults making less than 80K are concerned about this compared to roughly 3 in 10 who make more. And then about half of employed Californians think AI will decrease the number of jobs currently available in their industry. And I believe this share is similar across regions and most demographic groups. If I remember correctly, the shares are similar or slightly higher among Latinos, residents with only a high school education, and workers under 55, all of which I believe are around 56%. Dean, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, I think that's, it's really an interesting topic as we kind of see what's going to happen moving towards the future, right? We always tell our kids that like this is something you're going to have to deal with for sure. And so it's definitely an important issue. I'm glad we could ask about it.
Okay, next question. Housing costs are a big issue in our state. What does your survey say about views on the challenge of affordable housing and how that have looked over the past several years? So I think comparing this year to the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, you covered some of that, I think, but I do
Mhm.
think that, we've seen, as you mentioned, housing cost be like a very pointed issue when we ask the open-ended questions. And it's been a top 5 issue, actually, I'm pretty sure dating back to 2020. And so it's definitely something that's on people's mind. And we've consistently found people worrying about it. It's 1 in 4 today, I believe 26% you had said.
Mhm.
But that's a pretty consistent finding over the years, as well as people who have experienced difficulties. And so I do think that, it's something that is just really a big part of living in California is dealing with the housing cost, right? Like, and so it's just, I think it's just something that has been a problem for quite a while.
And we do ask other questions in our different surveys about this. I believe last December we asked about homelessness, which is, related. Um, and just I'm looking forward to kind of asking those questions again next year so we can get everyone more present data on this. Um, anyway, I believe we have only 2 questions left. So I'm going to ask you, Dean, was there anything about your findings that particularly surprised you in this survey?
Yeah, I think the thing that really sticks out to me is that on so many of these questions, whether it be kind of financial difficulties or worries or some of the policy questions, is that we've really seen elevated levels of worry across groups for a number of years, as well as support for economic policies that could improve the economic well-being of Californians. And so we've consistently seen, in many cases, 7 in 10, 6 in 10 or more supporting these policies. So despite the kind of ups and downs of COVID and the pandemic and the economic downturn, we've actually seen a quite high level of support for policies,
Mhm.
but sadly also kind of a high level of worry and people experiencing these. So I guess for me, it's just a kind of very much the consistency over a number of these surveys is quite stark.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, there's a large partisan agreement on most of these policies.
Yeah.
We see a majority, and I just want to also highlight a few other things we saw large partisan agreement. And in the survey, I saw that roughly 9 in 10 across parties think that the wealthy and poor should have equal influence on government policymaking.
Yeah.
Roughly around 8 in 10 cross-partisan groups think building an economy where every American has a chance to succeed should be a high priority for the next president. And 2 in 3 or more across parties also agree that it's important for workers to organize so that employers don't take advantage of them. So a lot of partisan agreement, which is something rare these days, but it's great to see. And I just wanted to leave you on a hopeful note.
Yes,
And
I
thank you.
know.
Thank you so much, Dean, for this presentation and great key takeaway discussion. So we've reached the end of our program, and I would like to thank our funders, the RJR and Francis F. Miller Foundation, the James Irvine Foundation, and the PPIC corporate and donor circles. And of course, thank you all for joining us today. We would appreciate you taking a moment to give us your feedback on this event. If you pre-registered for this event, you'll receive an email later today with a link to a short survey. But you can also scan this QR code on the screen right now. And finally, a recording of today's event will be available soon on the PPIC website and on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it again and share it with your colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great day.